Iñaki can start if you're ready, Iñaki.
Yes, thank you very
Uh,
much, Guillermo.
So
Yeah.
the floor is yours, though. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Guillermo, and thank you very much to UNIPI for organizing this MOOC. Thank you very much to all of the people that has joined this morning to this session. I'm going to share my screen. I have prepared a presentation. So as Guillermo has mentioned, I'm going to introduce the WILIAM economy module of the that we have been developing in the locomotion project. I have been leading the development of this module, but with the collaboration of other researchers, in particular people from UNIPI, from CESAR in Austria, of people from the University of Valladolid. I will start with a brief contextualization of why we have developed this economic model of WILIAM in general. And afterwards, I will introduce the WILIAM economy module, and I will try to show how we can use this model, and I have prepared a case study where we are going to assess the environmental and socioeconomic implication of the introduction of a universal basic income. And then I will finalize my presentation with some final remarks. Regarding the context, well, I think that this is something that is probably not new to you, because I think that Inigo has already presented this in the first slots of the MOOC. It is well known that the world is facing an unprecedented environmental crisis. 6 out of the 9 planetary boundaries have been breached due to human activity, and there is a urgent need for action. And this means that we have to develop policies, measures, and strategies to reverse this situation. And in this context, the integrated assessment models are a very useful tool for supporting this design of the policies and strategies. In particular, integrated assessment models have been extensively used in the latest decades to explore the climate mitigation pathways, especially in the context of the IPCC assessment reports. The working group 3 of the IPCC has been using these models to assess these decarbonization pathways. And in the latest years, these climate models, integrated assessment models, have been extended to assess other environmental dimensions like land, water, and biodiversity. In general, these IAMs have been used to assess or to identify strategies consistent with the climate targets. At first, they were linked to the Kyoto Protocol, and now with the targets of the Paris Agreement and the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions developed by the countries. In general, these integrated assessment models are used to analyze the techno-economic dimension of the decarbonization. They account for the costs and benefits and the technological changes of the system, but little attention has been paid to the human dimension of sustainable development. That it is the other side of the coin of the global sustainability crisis. What is this human dimension of the global crisis? Well, basically, we have in the world millions of people that cannot satisfy their basic needs in terms of nutrition, sanitation, health, education, etc. And this is mainly because of poverty and inequality. So in order to cope with this human dimension and also with the environmental crisis, the United Nations have developed the 2030 Agenda that includes both the environmental and human dimension of the crisis, and this human environmental dimension and are defining the Sustainable Development Goals. So, in principle, integrated assessment models could potentially be used to assess the SDGs and the global societal challenges from an integrated perspective. However, while most of the integrated assessment models, as I have already mentioned, cover the part of the environment and the resource use, they cover the climate change, energy, they have water, land, etc. However, sociopolitical and equality goals and other related to human development and governance are not well represented. This is a shortcoming of integrated assessment models. So what is the challenge? Well, the challenge is guarantee the universal satisfaction of basic human needs, that is, avoid the shortfall here within the planetary boundaries, avoiding the overshoot, and ultimately this translates in achieving the SDGs. And WILIAM, that you already know, it stands for Within Limits Integrated Assessment Models. It's a very well-suited model to support the design of pathways towards sustainability, not only environmental, but also human sustainability. Why? Well, first of all, because it represents the links and the interactions between the societal, economy, material, and environmental spheres. And it captures the environmental resource dimension of sustainable development, but also it pays special attention to the human, when I'm referring to human, the socioeconomic dimension of the sustainable development and its interaction with the environmental dimension. So in this context, the objective of the session is to show how this economic system that we have in the center of this diagram, how it is represented in WILIAM. And then I will try to illustrate with a case study how the model can be used to assess the specific measures to address global sustainable challenges, in particular, poverty, inequality, and climate change. So how is the WILIAM economic model? Well, first of all, I will try to highlight why we developed this model. The first objective of the model is to try to understand the relationship between the economic activity and the global societal challenges and the SDGs, including climate change, resource use, inequality, poverty, hunger, education, etc., and supporting the design of alternative futures to cope with these challenges. This is the main objective of the model. In the case of this macroeconomic model, also what we want to do with this model is to analyze the economy-wide implication of different policies and scenarios. With this word economy-wide, I mean that we are producing indicators, macroeconomic indicators regarding the output of the different sectors and countries, the employment, the household income, the consumption, the wealth, inequality, poverty, the government account, etc., at different levels, at the country level, at the industry level, and at the household level. The other objective is to represent alternative storylines and policies. Alternative, it means is that it is not, the model is not just focusing the typical economic policies like interest rates or this type of policies, but taxes, etc. But it also includes alternative policies, for example, this working time reduction or basic income, etc. And the last motivation is to capture the feedbacks between the economy and nature. The idea is to try to understand how the demand and supply of resources, materials, energy, water, land, and water interact with the economy, and also to try to capture the impact of climate change in the economy. Regarding the main characteristics of the model, I will define the economic module of WILIAM as a dynamic econometric multi-regional input-output model that has been extended by endogenous final demand, private consumption, public consumption, investment, and trade, by mutual feedbacks between quantities and prices. It is a simulation model. It's not an optimization model in the sense that the agents do not optimize and the results might not be optimal from the macro perspective. The economic growth in WILIAM is driven by exogenous and endogenous variables. From the exogenous side, we have the capital and labor productivity that are exogenous, and we have also some liquidity constraints. And from the endogenous part, we have the evolution of the energy intensity, that is the energy productivity, the labor force, and the resources, the availability of resources. The model is demand-driven in the sense that markets are generally cleared by price mechanisms, like in CGs, in computable general equilibrium model. But it is the demand under supply constraints on labor or resources that determines the output of the different industries and countries. And there is no guarantee that all available capital and labor resources will be used, and there will usually be spare production capacity and especially involuntary unemployment. The parameters of the model has been estimated, or part of the model, econometrically. This is another characteristic of the model. It's not based on calibration, but on econometric estimation. In principle, there is no crowding out effect of investment unless there are constraints in the real economy, in resources of our labor. And it's quite detailed in terms of regions. We have 35 regions represented in the model, 62 industries, 60 types of households for some of the regions. For 21 countries, we have 60 types of households, and for the rest, due to the lack of data, we have just a representative household. And these are the main components of the economy module. First, we have this household and consumption module, the frames and production module, the government module, investment capital, labor, trade, and then we have also links with other modules, in particular with the demography, energy, materials, land, and environmental modules. Here you have a screenshot of the different parts or modules of the economy module of WILIAM. You can see that it's quite complex in terms of components. And what I have done is just to try to summarize this in just a brief flow chart that you can see here, where you have the main components of the module. So here you have the household consumption module. Here you have the government. The firms is here. We have trade here, capital module, the labor module, the prices. Here you have the GDP. And then I have just plotted some of the main linkages with other modules. We have linkages with the environmental module. We have links with the demography module, here the labor force, and also something that it is not here, but it is the number of households that is coming from the demographic module that Robert will present later. We have also the impact of climate change here. We have also links with the energy module here and there, and we have also links with the materials modules and the metal modules. So, what are the components of the household module? First, we have the income part that is here. Household have income that it is coming from the labor, also from profits from the companies. They have also property income that it is coming from the assets. Also, they pay also interest rates from the liabilities. They have also social transfers that are coming from the government, and they have also taxes that are going from the household to the government, taxes on income and wealth. Part of the income is consumed and part it is saved. The part that it is saved is part of the net wealth that it is formed by the financial assets, the real assets, and the liabilities. And then another part is consumed. And this consumption depends on the prices of the different goods and the income. And in terms of consumption, we have different categories. We have durables, and in the durables, we have appliances, houses, and vehicles. We have the demand for energy in buildings, the demand of electricity, gas, liquids, solids, and heat. Then we have the demand for transportation. And here in this, we have the energy for transportation, that are basically liquids and electricity, and the demand for public transportation, that is rail, road, air, and maritime transportation. And we have also other non-durables demand that we have food, textile, furniture, services, leisure, and other. In the case of transportation, what the model works quite connected with the energy transportation model, in the sense that here, what the model computes is the total demand of passenger kilometers for each of these 60 households in the 35 regions. And these passenger kilometers are passed to the energy module, to the transportation module of the energy module. And then in this transportation module, the model defines the consumption of these categories of energy, how much energy is used for driving cars, for example, and also the public transportation. What is the expenditure in rail, road, air, maritime, and transportation? This information comes back to the economy module at this part of the consumption of the households. And then this consumption, that it is here, is part of the final demand that enters in the production module. Okay.
Iñaki, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
There's just a clarification question in the chat about what the appliances mean.
What? Sorry?
Appliances in the durable consumption.
Appliances like TVs, fridge, cookers, this type of appliances.
Okay, thank you. And the questions that are more deep, we are going to address in the end of the presentation.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
So this is the consumption module, and then we have here the government module. We have some, in the government module, we have some exogenous policy parameters that are defined by the user. We have some default settings, but this can be changed by the user. We have first the deficit to GDP ratio, the tax rates, and the transfers, and the composition of public consumption and investment. This composition is that the user can define how the public consumption is split between different categories, health, education, defense, etc. So this is something that is exogenous. And then this enters into the model, and the model computes the expenditure and the revenues. And the part of the revenues, we have the social contributions, social security contributions that are linked to the labor compensation. We have the taxes on income and wealth that are linked to the wealth and income of the households, the taxes of profits that are linked to the capital compensation, taxes on production that are linked to the output, and taxes on products that are linked to the consumption of, to the private consumption of goods, the investment, the government consumption as well, and also the intermediate demand of the sectors. And then we have also environmental taxes. Now we have taxes on greenhouse gases, the 3 gases. And then we have 3 gases, CO2, methane, and NO2. And then we have also taxes on resources, in both hydrocarbons and metals. This is from the part of the revenue, and from the part of the expenditure, we have the government consumption by category. This is what I mentioned before, that you can select the spirit of this government consumption in different categories like health, education, defense. The same for the government investment. We have also the debt interest that are paid by the government, and the social transfers to households. And then we have the government balance. We have the deficit to surplus, and we have also the debt. And then this model is basically linked to the household model through the transferences, and also is linked to the final demand through the consumption, government consumption, and the investment of the government. And also it's linked to many other parts of the model through the taxes. Then we have this first or production module. And as I mentioned before, it's a demand-driven multi-regional input-output model, in which it is the different components of the final demand: the private consumption, government consumption, the gross capital formation, investment, and the export, what drives the production of the different sectors and regions of the economy, and the demand of factors, in particular intermediates, goods that are used to produce other goods, capital, labor, and energy. In the case of capital and labor, we have exogenous productivities. And in the case of energy, we have endogenous energy productivity. In this case, in WILIAM, the technological change is driven by different factors. In particular, the energy intensity, the final demand level and composition of the different sectors. The changes in the energy system from bottom-up models, in particular the energy intensities and the production structure. And then also the change in the trade structure that, as I will explain later, is driven by Hamilton elasticity. So this is from the production module. So the input for the production model is basically the demand that it is coming from investment, from government, and from households, and from trade. And this entered into the production module, and the main output of this module is the gross output of the production of the different industries. And this is linked to the demand of factors, capital that we have here employment, labor, and we have here the demand of energy, and also the demand of intermediate goods. So in the trade module, what we have is a function that determines the trade shares depending on the ratio between domestic and foreign prices. It is through Hamilton elasticities that we have estimated in the project. And this is quite a standard in macroeconomic models, in computable generative models, and econometric input-output models. And then these shares are used to split the final demand of goods and the intermediate demand of goods in between domestic produced goods and imported goods. And the part of the imports are going to be, the imports are going to be part of the final demand of other countries, and the other way around. The exports are part of the final demand of the country. In the labor module, the first component that we have here is the labor force, that it is endogenous and depends on the working age population that it's coming here from the labor model, for the demographic model, and also it depends on wages. So the higher the working age population and the higher the wages, the higher the labor for the participation rate. Then we have exogenous hours per worker that can be used, for example, to simulate the effects of working time reduction policies. And we have also exogenous labor productivity. And then we have the employment that depends on the output, the level of production of the different sectors in the different countries, the labor productivity of the different sectors, and the hours per worker. Then we have wages here that are, we have a wage curve that it is estimated econometrically. In this wage curve determines the wage per hour that depends on the productivity, the consumer price index, and the unemployment rate. So if we have higher productivity and higher prices, we have an increase in the wage per hour. And also if we have a low unemployment rate, we have a higher wage per hour. And then we have the labor compensation that it is calculated just by multiplying the total employment times the hours per worker times the wage per hour. This is the labor compensation that goes later to the households. And then we have a double feedback between the wages and the demand. So the wages basically affect the prices. The higher the wages, the higher the prices. And this in turn affect the consumption. So the higher the wages, the higher the prices, the lower the consumption is. And the other way around. So if we have high prices, we will also have higher labor compensation. We will have higher income in households, and we have also higher consumption. So the wages are working in two different directions in relation to consumption. Then we have this capital module, the capital and investment module, in which we have, as I already mentioned, the exogenous capital productivity. And we have the investment, that the gross fixed capital formation, that depends on the level of output, the capital productivity, the depreciation, that, including both the typical depreciation rate that we have in the investment function, but also the impact of climate change that reduce the stock of capital. And also it depends on the gap between the desired and actual capital stock. In the case of the investment in the energy sectors, it comes from the bottom-up energy module. And we have also the capital compensation, that it is a markup over the total costs. And this basically determines the profits that are going to be shared to the households. Then we have this price module or price equation, in which prices depends on the production cost, labor, capital, including both capital consumption and profits, the cost of the intermediate products, the price of materials that are coming from the bottom-up models, in particular prices of fossil fuels and metals. Also the taxes on production, the taxes on products, and the taxes on inputs and emissions. And then we, as I mentioned before, we have different links with other modules. In particular, we have the link with the household module, mainly with the labor force and the number of household and population. We have the link with the transportation module. We have also a link with the energy, the bottom-up energy module. This is the transformation module, and also the demand of the bottom-up calculation of the demand of household energy consumption. There is a link with the material module that implies the demand, the supply, and the prices. We have also links with the emissions that are coming from the environmental module. Basically, the link is that we have taxes on emissions. And we have also the link with the climate change impacts that affect the capital stock. So this has been the first part of the presentation of the model, and next I will try to show with an example of, with a case study, how the model can be used to assess different policies. And in this case, what we have simulated is a universal basic income. So what is the context of this universal basic income? It is well known that tackling poverty and inequality have been identified by the United Nations as two of the main societal challenges, which are linked to the SDGs 1, no poverty, and SDG 10, reduce inequality. And basically, the problem is that economic inequality and poverty are major obstacles for human and economic development and for social cohesion, and for also are pretty much related to different SDGs like hunger or energy poverty, etc. In this context, the universal basic income has been suggested as an instrument to reduce the poverty and guarantee the satisfaction of human needs. And what is exactly a universal basic income? Well, it's quite simple. It's a payment from the government to everyone, no matter of the individual or income level or needs. So it's a same amount of money that is given to everyone in a country. And this is something that is already been discussed in different countries. For example, it is a pilot program in the UK, and also it's something that it has been recently that is being considered now in Canada. The problem with this universal basic income is that it can create a fiscal burden and leading to higher deficits and increase the debt if it is not compensated by greater tax revenues. And what it has been suggested is that the universal basic income has to be deployed together with tax reforms, in particular, in order to further reduce inequality. it has been suggested that that the way of funding the universal basic income should be progressive income and wealth taxation. And some authors has highlighted that wealth taxation is better than income to reduce to fund this universal basic income, because wealth taxation can reduce the inequality more than income taxes. Basically, because wealth is more unequally distributed than income, and also because wealth inequality has increased dramatically in developing countries in the latest decades. And this is also something that it is currently in the agenda, and some institutions are already claiming for an increase in for putting a tax on the wealth of super rich people. The main problem of the universal basic income is that it is can reduce for sure the poverty and inequality, but can have negative feedbacks in terms of climate change, because it promotes consumption. Higher income basically translating to higher consumption translating to more emission. So there is a trade-off with between reducing poverty and inequality and climate change. Well, and basically the problem is that the main source of this rebound effect that we have, or this increasing consumption effect that we have with the universal basic income, is that we observe in the data decrease in average propensity to consume. What does this mean? That the per every unit of income, low income household spend more than high income household. So if you give money or transfer money from these people to these people, what you are going to have is a increase in the consumption. So you can, if this is that data for you, Peru, you can see that lower income people basically spend all the money the income that they have, and in the high income people, they spend like half of the income that they receive. So what we have suggested in this case study is to combine the tax on wealth with a CO2 tax on the household emissions. That it is inspired in the ETS, the emission trade system of Europe, that it's not. It is going. It is being discussed that it is going to be expanded now to household direct emissions. We have analyzed this universal basic income for 21 EU countries that are the countries, as I mentioned before, for which we have different household types. And we have implemented this universal basic income from 2025 onwards until 2050. And in this case, while we combine this universal basic income with two different funding mechanisms. First, we fund this universal basic income with a wealth tax on wealthiest households. And in the second scenario, we combine a wealth tax with a CO2 tax. So this is what we are doing in this case study. What are the mechanisms that are operating in the model when we introduce the basic income? Well, first of all, when we introduce the basic income, the first effect is an increase in the disposable income of all the 60 types of households. Remember that we are giving the same amount of money to all the households. This is part of the mechanism. The other part is that since we are funding the wealth tax, the universal basic income with a wealth tax, we are going to reduce the wealth of high income households, and at the same time we are going to affect the income that they are receiving from their assets. So as a consequence of this increase in the disposable income, we have an increase in the consumption of lower households due to the increase of the income, and we have normally the opposite in high income groups, because to the high income groups, they reduce of course that you are giving to them money, but you are also taking money from their wealth. So in the net effect is that they are reducing the disposable income. And in general, the net effect in the aggregate effect is a net positive effect in terms of income and in terms of consumption. This increase in the income and in the consumption and in the economic increases in the economic activity, I create more emissions. So this is basically the mechanism is higher increase is higher consumption is higher economic activity, and these are translating to more CO2 emissions. And then this is the first case study, let's say, and then we try to buffer to some extent these CO2 emissions by increasing by taxing CO2 emissions. And when we introduce this tax on CO2 emissions, we have two different effects in the model. First, it reduced the tax burden on the wealthiest, since part of the universal basic income is now funded by the tax on CO2. So it reduced the wealth tax on wealthiest people. And the second effect is that it reduces fossil fuel use in household. For example, because it triggers the introduction of more electric vehicles in the energy transportation model. So this is the data that we introduced. Well, this is in the model, yes. So then we have a direct transfer for each of these 21 households that is implemented from 2025 to 2050, and we have decided to that this transfer is equivalent to 10% of the average household consumption. Sorry, of the average household income in each country in 2025, and from 2025 onward, this amount is adjusted by inflation. So the model takes when it is simulating in 2025, it computes the average basic income and apply this 10%, and this is the basic income that it is going to be applied. So this is the universal basic income for the different countries. You can see that, for example, in the Luxembourg, it will be more like $16,000 per household per year, and of course, in low-income countries, European countries, it will be much lower, like close to 1,500 in Bulgaria, 2,000 in Hungary, etc., etc. This is in absolute figures what each household will receive, and if we compare the universal basic income with the GDP in the year 2025, you can see that it is between this policy will cost between 6 and 10% of the GDP, depending on the country. So you can see that it is quite a huge amount of money. The idea is that how we have prepared this simulation is that the universal basic income is fiscal neutral, in the sense that we are going to create new taxes to finance this universal basic income, and the new taxes are going exactly equal to what the cost of the policy. And we have two different mechanisms. First, we have a wealth tax, and here what the model does is to calculate the tax rate that is required to get the revenues to pay the policy, and the taxes on financial on real assets of the richest people. And then we have this combination of the wealth tax and CO2 tax. We have set a CO2 tax of $100 in 2025, and it increases at a 3% per year until 2050. And then the model computes the revenues of this tax. It compares with the cost of the policy, and then it calculates the wealth tax that is required to fill the gap between the CO2 tax revenues and the universal basic income. And here you can see how is the average wealth tax rate from in the period 2025-2050 for the different scenarios. The blue one is the tax rate when we only put a tax on wealth, and the green one is the tax wealth when we are taxing both wealth and CO2. So you can see that in most countries it is lower in the green and in the blue scenario. And this is the CO2 tax. As I mentioned before, it starts in $100 and it increases 3% a year. How we actually implement this in the model? First, well, probably this is something that has been already explained by my colleagues. I think that Lucas already has some of this. And we have in the folder where WILIAM is installed, we have a folder that it is scenario parameters, and we have an Excel file that it is called scenario parameters XLX. And we have a spreadsheet that it is called economy. And in economy, you in this spreadsheet you have many different policies or hypotheses that you can change. In the case of this policy, what we activate is the basic income. We have a switch here where you put a 1 here, and you are activating the policy in these countries. These are the countries where we have 21 countries where we have 60 households. Here, the starting year of the policy, and here is the amount of the basic income. It is the share of the basic income over the total average income. As I already said, we have set it to 10%. Sorry. Then you have to select how you are going to fund this policy. In this case, it is fund. We have selected a new tax on wealth. We have also an option for get the money from a tax from income, tax on income, corporation profits, and then you can also have this option where we combine the tax on wealth and CO2 tax. So when we simulate the tax on CO2, we put here 2, and that's it. And then here we can select how the income evolve in the future. And here the setting is that it is increasing at the same rate as the consumer price index. Also, you can also put the user can define what is the growth rate of the UV. And then here you select who is going to pay the tax, the wealth tax. Here we have the 60 household types, the income and number is the income level of the household. These are 4 and 5 are the richest people. And then we have different household types. We have sparse single, then single, etc., etc., etc. But now here we are putting the taxes to income 4 and 5. And then we have to select, when we put the CO2 tax, we can select if we put the CO2 tax to sectors, to households, and to sector and household. And we can also select which are the gases that are going to be taxed. In this case, we are taxing just CO2. And this is the tax rate that, as I mentioned before, it started at 100 and increased at 3% a year. So and I just go quickly through the results that are preliminary. So if anyone want to quote this, please contact me before, because we are still developing the model and changing some things. So, well, this is the main result of the policy, how the inequality is reduced. Here, what we can see is that the gray bar is the Gini index for the different countries in 2015, the starting point. The black one is the Gini index in 2050 without policy. And then you can see the blue and green one is the Gini index in 2050 with the policy. The blue one with the tax wealth, and the green one tax wealth plus CO2 tax. So you can see how in all the countries this policy is quite effective to reduce the inequality. Indeed, we can see that the reduction in the Gini average from 10% in Germany up to almost 20% in countries like Spain or Croatia, more than 10% in Germany and Sweden, for example. As I mentioned before, the first effect of the policy is that it increases the average disposable income in the different countries. And you can see that in the case of the tax of wealth, it increases less than in the case of taxes on CO2 emissions. And here is the average real household consumption. As I mentioned before, the increase in the income triggers consumption up to, in some countries, up to 3 or 4%. And in some countries, you have a reduction. Here, for example, what we have is that the net effect of the policy, when you increase the consumption of increase the income of low-income people and reduce the income of the high-income people, in this case, the net effect is negative in terms of consumption, but not when you introduce the CO2 tax. Then we have the effect in the average real GDP per capita growth. And you can see that in the blue, the black one is the average growth rate in the baseline scenario, and blue and green are with the policy. And you can see that the growth rate is slightly higher when you introduce the basic income. It makes sense because you are triggering consumption, as I mentioned before. And you have, since you have more economic activity, you have a reduction in the average unemployment rate. From the government accounts perspective, what we can see is a reduction in the average government GDP government debt to GDP ratio. Basically, because as I mentioned before, the policy is fiscal neutral. You are not affecting the public deficit, but at the same time, you are triggering economic activity. You are increasing the GDP. So the government to the GDP ratio is going to be reduced. And this is the composition of the tax revenue that are to finance the basic income. And you can see that most of the income comes from wealth, and just part is coming from the CO2 taxes. And this is the effect in terms of emissions. You can see that in the case of the tax on wealth, when we only put a tax on wealth, we have an increase in emissions in all the countries. This is what the problem that I was mentioning at the beginning of the presentation. But when we introduce the CO2 tax, in some countries, this increase in the emission is buffered, and in other countries is offset. So you have a net negative effect in emissions. The emissions are reducing in some countries, and at the same time you are reducing the inequality. Some conclusions from this case study. Well, it is clear from this study that the universal basic income plus the wealth tax can reduce the inequality, and at the same time improve the economic performance. We have seen a reduction in the unemployment rate, an increase in the GDP, improvement in government accounts, etc. But the problem is that it can also boost the emissions. However, this negative environmental impact can be buffered by funding the universal basic income through a CO2 tax. And in general, the wealth tax, together with the CO2 tax, performs better from the economic and environmental perspective in all the indicators that we have seen, except the wealth tax is slightly better for reducing inequality. And this universal basic income is also interesting in the context of the transition towards a low-carbon economy, because as we know, this transition can affect vulnerable groups. In particular, probably the energy transition is going to trigger energy prices and can create energy and transport poverty. In the case of the low-income groups, they usually lack of financial capacity to adapt to these increases in prices. They cannot invest in refurbishment, in renewables, efficiency, etc. So in this case, we think that this universal basic income in this context can be very useful to contribute to ensure that all people has the minimum living standards. And just some final remarks. The first thing that I would like to highlight is that WILIAM is beyond a climate change integrated assessment models. As I mentioned before, most existing integrated assessment models are focused on climate change. That, of course, is one of the global societal challenges, one or probably the most relevant global societal challenges. But WILIAM provides an appropriate framework for an integrated assessment model of not only the climate dimension, but also the social, the human dimension, the economic dimension, and also the environmental dimension, and can be used to explore this implication of policies of this implication of policies aimed to cope with different global societal challenges. The second highlight is that WILIAM can capture these complex feedback synergies and trade-offs between the different societal challenges. As I mentioned before, we have this trade-off between inequality, poverty, and climate change that we have seen in the Universal Basic Income case study. And finally, thought that I would like to share with you is that the limit of WILIAM is your imagination. One of the nice things of WILIAM is that it's an open source model. It is quite easy to use. It is programmed in Benzene, that it is very easy to use, I would say. And also it offers multiple possibilities for developing custom modules, policies, and scenarios. So it's quite, it's not so tricky to develop policies or new scenarios or whatever you consider. And this is all from my side. I think that I am time. So if you have, I think that there are questions in the chat, Guillermo.
Thank you very much, Iñaki, for the very good presentation. So it's a complex economic model, but I think you were able to pass the message and really introduce WILIAM economic part. There are many questions in the chat, actually. So if you want, I can read for you, or you can have a look also.
I can have a look.
Okay.
Is there any aspect of health in the model, for instance, pandemics and epidemics increased by climate warming? So far, there is no feedback between climate change and health. I think it is not working, but it is in the pipeline, I would say. However, I think that probably Robert can better answer to this question later. Appliance, I already mentioned. SRTVs, these features, that stuff. Exactly. How constrained public finance? Is there a hard cap on the yes. What we have is now we have a baseline setting, let's say, in which we have a trend for the evolution of the debt to GDP ratio. Maybe I can show the. So this is the scenario parameter Excel file that I mentioned before. So here you have many parameters. For example, this is the target that it is implemented now for the ratio between the government deficit and the GDP. So this is the starting, and now we have built this a trend. Okay, this is a trend that we have until 2050, but the user can change this trend. For example, here is the target that we have in 2050 that we have imposed. But this is something that the user can change. No climate change damage on worker productivity nor output. There are damages on labor productivity. However, now they are not. They have not been validated. But the climate change impact that we have in the economy model are labor productivity and stock of capital. There is not a direct impact in the output. Basically, what we have is that the impacts on the labor productivity and the impacts on the capital stock reduces the production capacity. This triggers increases the prices of products, and this reduces the demand. And this reduction in demand is the one that it is causing the reduction in the output. So this is the sequence. There is not a direct impact in the output, because in the real world it doesn't work like that. In the real world, the climate change affects the effects are normally on the stock of capital and the labor productivity, and also there are impacts on the yields of crops, but they are not in this model. In this module, they are in the agricultural module. Why deficit ratio is a exogenous parameter? Basically, because it's a policy parameter in the real world. In the real world, government set a target, deficit target, and then with this target and the revenue and the taxes that they have, they compute they collect the taxes. They also have some revenues, and at the end of the period, it could be the case that there are deviation because one thing is that what the model the government plans, and the other thing is that the output that you have at the end of the period. In this case, the policy, the target is the deficit to GDP ratio, is exogenous, and then the model computes what is actually the deficit to GDP ratio. There are also an option, but we haven't, because we decided to implement this deficit to GDP ratio. Another option could be to impose a limit to the debt. That can be also implemented, but I mean, this is also that can be done if anyone is interested. It's pretty easy to implement. Is the capital sector, do you distinguish between financial and real capital? We have also we only have let's say a financial submodule for households, and in the household we have real assets and financial assets, and also liabilities. Is exogenous productivity estimated econometrically? No, it's not econometrically. It's just a scenario that we put a target and some trends, and that's it. How sensitive is the model to variation in the productivity? It's very sensitive, especially to labor productivity. The model is very sensitive to this variable. How are the various interest rates on household liabilities government determined? They are determined exogenously. We have different tax rates for the different from the government debt or from the liabilities, and that is let's say a hypothesis that we have in the model, or a policy. Is there a budgetary constraint to GDP or deficit to GDP in the model? Yes, as I mentioned before, this is the parameter that I have already shown. Why did you choose to increase the CO2 tax progressively? I mean, because the idea is to try to you have inflation in the model, and the idea is to some extent to increase the CO2 tax in order to be consistent with a inflation pathway, and also because this is also the policy as it is being discussing now by the European Commission is going to be defined as such. So the idea is to put a lower CO2 tax at the beginning and then further increase in the future. However, the policy is inspired in the ETS, but it is not exactly what it is being discussing, because the quantity is lower in the ETS too. The model assumes around euros. The model assumes around 500 month universal basic income for Finland. In Finland, we have a universal basic experiment that paid 160 a month, so quite close. Thank you. Did you consider taxes on income from wealth, such as capital gains, instead of addition to tax on wealth? Indeed, yes. I'm going to share my screen again. Here, we have three different options for financing the basic income. The first one is the net tax on wealth. The third one is the tax on wealth and CO2 taxes. These are the two that for which I have presented results. And then we have also a tax on the profits, on income that is coming from corporation. So we already simulated that, but for simplicity, I have just shown the result of the other two scenarios. How consumer prices is calculated? Do you account for cross countries differences change over time in household consumption basket? Does consumer price index feedback into anything in the model? Well, sure. Basically, the consumer we have different prices in the model. We have the prices of production prices, basic prices that are the prices that cover the production cost. On top of those prices, we have taxes on final products, and these are the purchasers prices. And then we have prices that these purchasers prices for the different products that we have in the or industry that we have in the model translate to different consumption categories, to the consumption categories that I mentioned before. We have housing, appliances, vehicles, food, etc., etc. So basically, these prices translate to households, and depending on the weight of each household or the consumption basket, or the weight of the different commodities in the consumption basket, we calculate a consumer price index for each household. Okay, and these prices affect the consumption decision. And well, there are many feedbacks with the consumption price index in the model. For example, when we deflate variables, because the model works in nominal and real terms, we use these deflators. And well, prices have many effects, but we don't have only, as I mentioned before, consumption price indexes, but we have also, this is just an indicator, but we have all other prices that are affecting the model as well. Regarding the climate damage function, we don't have a climate damage function as in a standard model. We have done in particular, Paula from the University of Valladolid has been doing a very deep study on bottom-up analysis of the impact of climate change, on actual impacts of climate change on specific sectors, and these are the data that has been used to calibrate some ad hoc or some new damage function, let's say. And I think that I have already answered to all the questions. Guillem. Where this can be found? There is a deliverable that it is 4.7 of locomotion, that you can find it in the website of the project, where we explain how the damage functions are how these damages or climate change damages on capital productivity and labor productivity are calculated. And also the deliverable also includes something that I haven't explained today, that it is a study on adaptation. This is something that we haven't implemented, but I think that it also relevant. Thank you, Iñigo. He has posted the link. And that's all from my side. And in case you wanted further information on the economic module of WILIAM, you can contact me or Valladolid, and I will be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much.